Okay, a lot to cover today. We're going to try to finish the chapter. And we continue basing aside from the simple meaning, the contextual meaning of Proverbs, to look at Midrash Mishlei, that particular Midrashic composition on this chapter. We left off in the middle of the first section that's on the page, 812. I'm not sure we finished it. I remember we did the first part of it, but I made a note to begin there. So why don't we begin? Why don't we read it again, 8 to 12, and say what we have to say, and then we'll get to the next section, which will provide the foundation for the commentaries that we're going to look at. Okay, Megan, you want to start with 8 to 12?
A person's way may be tortuous and strange, though their actions are blameless and proper. Dwelling in the corner of a roof is better than a contentious wife in a spacious house. The desire of the wicked is set upon evil. Their neighbors find no favor in their eyes. When scoffers are punished, the simple are edified. When sages are taught, they gain insight. The righteous one observes the house of a wicked person and subverts the wicked to their ruin.
Right. So we did go over the first ones. Well, I'll go over them again. The first verses, and it's the last two lines that we didn't do, which are the interesting thing here, I think. Um, the a person's way may be torturous and strange, is the translation of the way that Masoretic text appears there. Hafachach derech ish vazar. But many have pointed out that vazar is a what we call deutography. It's a repetition, and neither is repetition, or two words are a repetition of the same word, or a word is repeated needlessly based on it's a scribal error. And for those that read the Hebrew, vazar, which grammatically is problematic as well, having it this way, is very similar in the way it looks to vazach. Vav Zayin Chaf. A Chaf is basically a longer resh. The part that goes down on the resh is shorter on the resh as opposed to on the kaf. It's the same shape. And so not that matters so much, but that makes the Hebrew read easier. And we mentioned last week that it may seem that somebody is doing the right thing, or we may know somebody's doing the right thing in their life, yet their life is a mess. Everything is topsy-turvy. Even though they're blameless and proper, which is basically the theology of, I remember seeing once a table of theologies in the early days of probably it was Facebook, social media, the theology of shit happens, right? There's the things that happen that you can't really justify. Now, of course, uh, there's a lot of talk about this right now, especially in Israel, about when bad things happen. Aryeh Deri had been quoted on saying, the head of Shas, that October 7th was the best thing that happened to the Jewish people because it shook them up rather that they're on the wrong course. It's punishment. Seeing those kinds of things is punishment. I don't want to go into that right now, but this is we did talk about that a little bit last time, but that's what's in these two lines. I say I don't want to go because I know there's a lot. We all have a lot to say about that. I think it's pretty. I'm justified in assuming that that's not the theology of anybody here. That we don't think that bad things happen to people as a punishment necessarily. But I think we can agree, though, that when bad things happen to people, it is an opportunity to take a look at their lives, whether it's the way they're treating themselves physically or emotionally, or just in general to redefine their relationships with or the relationship with the world around them. And then we talked also last week about this thing about being punished. The husband going up to the roof, to the corner. You stand in the corner of the roof right now. That's better than being downstairs with the difficult wife or the contentious wife. That comment about Murphy's comment, quoted by Fox. How come there's nothing in the book of Proverbs about contentious husbands? And Fox kind of saying, he said it in a nice way. That's because, as we all know, this literature was written by men. And then graciously he writes something like, but there, one could be sure there was wisdom amongst women that talked about the contentious husband. All right, so we have that, but we're going to remember that dwelling in one place as opposed to another place, because that's going to come up again in one of the verses coming up in this chapter. Um, and then this kind of the desire of the wicked wicked is set upon evil. In other words, they want to do bad. That's an interesting theological thing, and interesting philosophical point as well. Does anybody really want evil? Do they live for evil the way that we have them? We see
Yes.
characters did somebody want to say something?
No, that was me. I was just talking to myself. But yeah, there are people who I've experienced enjoy inflicting not so nice things on others.
A perversion. Um, so then we get into enjoy one thing, and are they able to act differently? Have they been forced to act that way by how they've been brought up, and where does nurture come in with nature here? Is there somebody who's naturally born with a soul which is wicked? Interesting questions, philosophical questions. Um, yeah. In any case, and their neighbors will find no favor. Favor is there's a better Fox gives a better translation of these two lines, or this line. He will find no forgiveness in the eyes of others. The word yichon from chen v'chesed is favor, but also chanan means to forgive. So okay, and all right, then we get down to this, let's get down to the bottom line here. The righteous one. The reason I put it in bold here is that Les and others have asked, can the righteous one or can the wise one refer to God? And while my usual answer is, if Book of Proverbs wants to talk about God, it talks about God, as we'll have later on in this chapter. But in any case, that's the way that many have understood this verse here. Because otherwise, how do you understand yeah. I'm sorry, maskil. Maskil tzaddik here. Maskil is not the person, the wise person. It's the one who is wise enough to acts wisely, or in this case, observes. It's translated observes here. If it is God, then God sees what's happening, observes what's happening in the house, in the life of a wicked person, and then makes sure that that wicked person runs into bad, ruins. It runs into ruin. Fox argues that if tzaddik meant God here, it would have to have the definitive would be hat tzaddik. I proves I'm not really, I didn't go into the details as to how he proves it, but he maintains that it is indeed a person. A person observes what's happening and subverts as opposed to subverts, declares. No, sorry. I wrote a wrong note there. I know it's a little, what I found interesting here was just this idea, what could righteous one in this particular case mean God, as most of the medieval commentaries or many commentaries have it, or does it here too, does it mean just a righteous person? This is 12. I'm sorry. Righteous is most naturally understood as any righteous human. But how can a human, however righteous, confound or destroy, that word salaf, the wicked? So then there's different theories as to how that happens exactly. Is that the wicked person will see what's going on, the righteous person will see what's going on and will say, that person's going to get It's not that he decides, make sure that it happens. He's going to, with his mouth, say that he's going to assure himself that person is going to get his when the time comes. Okay, I don't know.
Don't you have a sort of inherent conflict between the first two and the last two? Well, the first verse and the last verse, and that in the first verse, it says that a blameless, in other words, a good person might have a tortuous and strange path, meaning God, did that, versus at the end, the wicked person is going to be punished. In other words, in the first one, God can't prevent the bad things from happening to a good person, and then the last one, God will make sure a bad person is punished.
Right. That is if it is talking about God. If it's not talking about God, you still have that contrast between a good person and the life is bad, and a bad person, is fine, perhaps in the first part, and the second one that the bad person is gonna get what's coming to them. Well, so remember, Les, these units that I've put in the boxes here, they're totally artificial, right? They're in order for us to take a bite of the text. And it is, while it is true that often or sometimes one couplet will connect to the couplet after it. For instance, here, if you look in the Hebrew, the second to last couplet, Banash leitz yachkam peti uvhaskil lechacham. That word lahaskil, in this case, it is the wise will gain insight. Maskil tzadik, the same verb. Lahaskil, maskil, has these two couplets together, but they're not saying necessarily the same thing. One might think that in editing this book, the person who compiled all these different couplets said, oh, there's a word they connect each other. So we have that. On the other hand, we have things in the same proximity, in this case, not the beginning, the end of a unit, because it's an artificial unit that I put together, but in proximity, two verses that say more or less the opposite, or certainly contrast with each other. Because, as you've said many times, Les, this guy needed a better editor. Right. Okay. All right. So on this section, any kind of final comments that people want to make before we go on to the new material for today? Okay, then. So Les, why don't you read 13 to 16 for us?
One who turns a deaf ear to the cry of the wretched will likewise call and not be answered. A gift in secret subdues anger, a present in private fierce rage. I don't get that. Anyway, justice done is a joy to the righteous, to evildoers ruination. One who strays from the path of prudence will rest in the company of ghosts.
Okay. So the first one is relatively easy, right? What goes around comes around, if I had to put it in other words. And I would like to say that it's not just a tit for tat kind of a thing. I think I'm always thinking in terms of culture. One who has a culture of not really listening is going to be swept up in that. Who helps create a society that doesn't listen is going at one point is going to be in that in the tables will be turned, and that person won't be listened to as well, or at least so goes the theory. So anything on that before we go on to the next one, which is a little bit tricky? Okay, so the words in Hebrew are a little bit easier here, less. Matan beseter yichaper, or maybe yichaper af. Matan beseter is a catchphrase that becomes standard language in rabbinic literature for giving charity, anonymous charity. So all those websites or lists of donors, anonymous, right? Somebody asked to be anonymous. In some cases, because they don't want other people pestering them. That's what I found in fundraising very often. Although sometimes, some cases, no, I just want to give. I don't want any credit, don't want any honor, because this I want to give is the right thing to give. Other people give because they're giving in cash, and at some point they might be audited and somebody want to say, where did you get that cash from? I mean, there's a lot of reasons, to be anonymous, I think. But the one here, at least the way it became, Matan Beseter, is giving tzedakah. So if you give somebody something in secretly, then it's kind of subdue anger of, maybe, I don't know, I don't think it's God here. In other words, you're not making a big deal that here I'm going to give up this poor person all that, you just do it quietly. You subdue the anger of God, or it could be you subdue the anger of somebody perhaps being embarrassed by being given this gift. You go up to the street and you give somebody $20 in front of everybody else. That's different than just putting it in, leaving it in an envelope, whatever it might be. It's the it's what we know about in the rabbinic world. When you do a ceremony, sometimes a funeral or a wedding, you'll in a handshake, the handshake with the cash. Do you guys know about that? I doubt if it happens in the world of therapy or in the world of bookkeeping, Richard, although you probably had problems with people that did that as a bookkeeper. But this idea, and Richard knows that sometimes somebody will give me cash for something we do. I don't want to take the cash. I want to register it. Even eventually it ends up in my salary, I still want to have it, so we have this process that Richard and I do to get it into the books. But this idea of shaking somebody's hand, and then there's a few $100s in it, there's something very icky about it, I think.
Yeah, that's usually a bribe.
Yeah,
Not charity. It's usually, when you do something like that, it's to bribe the person.
I think that people do it here. I think that, and by the way, it's almost always a man who's doing it, an older man. It seems to be, it's often the father of a bride, or the brother of somebody's buried, something like that. That's, I think, in culture, maybe it has to do with, well, you could take this, you don't have to declare this, right? You don't have to pay income tax on this. Maybe that's the connection there. But
Or not wanting other people to see that you're
Yes, yeah.
giving and embarrassing the person.
Right.
yeah. So that I think that's what it would be with charity. That's my job. That's what I do. I wouldn't be, I'm not embarrassed. Well, maybe in any case, that's what I think what the subdues anger here is to keep, don't embarrass the person who's receiving. On the other hand, the exact same scenario from a side, when you see somebody else slipping an envelope quietly to somebody, but he happens to be a judge or a city council member or whatever it is, it's the same act. It looks like the same thing from afar, but there are two different things going on, and one subdues rage, the other one brings about fierce anger. So maybe God is in the background here. Is that easier to understand now?
Are the nouns gift and present? What's the Hebrew, and do they imply something different?
No, matan literally is from the word latet, natan, noten, hatorah, right, to give. And shochad, though, so shochad is a different word. Shochad, I don't know why they went for present here. Shochad is usually bribe.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, why did this translation go for?
So why would so I guess, who is it, subduing rage or causing rage in the second line?
The second one is causing rage.
So a bribe in private. Well, except if it's one sentence, and the first one, it says the gift in secret subdues the anger, isn't it saying a present in private subdues fierce rage?
No, I wouldn't go with the present. So if you go, let me just see what he says about the translation of present. Yeah, he says a gift in secret. When I say he, I mean Fox, right? A gift in secret assuages anger, and a bribe in the bosom strong wrath.
It causes. There's no verb there. Does it cause or subdue?
It because there is no verb in the sentence itself. So what does he say? I don't know why I didn't look into this more. I don't know. He also doesn't think that the word here, he doesn't read subdues. He reads mechaper is assuage.
But maybe the verb carries over to the second subdues.
Yeah, it usually does, but yechaper, usually that's the case. When there's no verb, it carries over into the second line.
That's why I don't read it the way you read it.
Yeah.
Well, maybe it's subduing the rage of the bridee.
I don't know. Right in conjunction with the preceding verse, this one gains an additional message. One who refuses another's plea, with the preceding verse. One who refuses another's plea for help rather than discreetly offering charity will himself be ignored by God. I don't know. What did you want to say? Was that Rita Claire?
I was going to say, I don't know where it is, but isn't there a phrase that says, don't let your right hand know what your left hand is doing?
And what does that mean?
To me, it means don't let it be known to everybody what you're doing, because you're doing it in private, but you don't have to announce it.
I think that's how I originally I think what you're saying is how I originally understood it, but it seems that second line is a problem without a verb. Malka, any ideas on how we might understand the two lines together?
A gift in secret subdues anger, a present in private subdues fierce rage.
But does that make sense?
If you use it as a gift rather than a bribe.
Oh, so that's why he
Right.
wrote, that's why NJPS
Right.
has a present and not
Right.
bribe. Yeah. Okay. So it's basically saying the same thing.
Mhm.
Yeah. Oh, I like the way I read it much better. But it doesn't seem to hold with the text. Okay. All right.
So what the Hebrew word for shachat,
Yeah.
what is it? Vischad?
V'shochad b'chei chema azah.
What does shochad mean?
Shochad usually means bribery.
Oh.
But they would have to go to what I would do here is look up in the biblical dictionary to see there'll be other meanings. And if it's in the New Jewish Publication Society, that means at least there's other usages of this word where it's not bribery, but just giving. And look at, I guess somebody would say, what are euphemisms for bribery? A gift? I would imagine in English also there's some word that could go both ways.
It's an inappropriate gift.
That's already with that modification. I would say there's probably a single word that could go both ways. Gift could be if you wink your eyes, gift, or if you quote, air quotes. All right.
A gratuity.
Gratuity could be, is there a negative gratuity? Richard, is there a negative thing for
I can't
gratuity?
think of something else. No.
Is it like paying for protection? You give somebody money so that they won't beat you up or kill your business, or
Are you asking about the word shochad? No, shochad that I know of is in the context of bribing a judge or something like that.
But that's the modern Hebrew use.
No, even
In the
biblical.
Tanakh, yeah.
Oh, okay.
But I'm gonna let me look in the
That's where I was looking.
biblical dictionary. So we go BDB under shochad.
So it has
Where does
BDB gives 7 different multiple examples.
Oh, under shochad, you mean? It starts, yeah.
That's what I'm
it's a
looking. I'm
present-
looking in Halot, but
Yeah. So here
a
shochad is
gift intended to secure favor. Exodus 23, Deuteronomy 10, Deuteronomy 16, Deuteronomy 27. So
that's
a
a
bribe.
tip. That's a tip.
yeah, here BDB has this, in this case, it's hush money. Not in this case, another case in Proverbs. Hush money.
Proverbs 21 is where we are, and
Yeah,
then
a legal or possibly the legal compensation. I don't know. Interesting.
I
Hush,
just,
hush money is different than a bribe, though.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
A bribe, you're asking somebody to do something for you. Hush money is asking them to keep quiet.
But it's
but
still
that's doing
illegitimate.
something for you though, right? Keeping quiet.
Well, it's a negative something. You're not doing something. You're preventing them.
No, shochad is hush money. The person who gives it to you is doing something negative, though. You may be passive, but the person who gave you the money is shutting you
I
up.
mean, the briber versus the bribee.
Yeah, no, I mean, hush money versus the giver of the hush money. Rita Claire, you wanted to say something?
I was just going to give you what Google says about that phrase I just mentioned. Actually, it's out of Matthew, the book of Matthew. And what it means is emphasizes the need for secrecy and discretion, especially when performing acts of charity or kindness.
Cool.
So this has to do more for doing things that have a good intention rather than a bribe, which might be leading to something that is not a good thing.
That would bring us back to the way that I originally explained this, that we're less sure now can be found in the text itself. Okay, let's move on. The next one is an interesting one, right? Simcha tzaddik asot mishpat. The justice done by righteous is joy, is done in joy. I think the feeling of doing something right. There's something, you get a feeling of pleasure from that as well. On the other hand, justice done by evildoers is so a mechita, ruination, is from the verb. I had to look that up. Is from the verb chatat, not chatat with a tet, right? Chet taf taf, which has to do to be wiped out. The opposite of not only joy, but it is back to your people, the favorite people you were thinking of, Charles, beforehand when you talked about those that have pleasure in doing evil. When they do, perhaps the same people when they find themselves doing something right, it causes them pain. Okay. All right, and then these last two lines, one who strays from the path of prudence. In this case, it's this is not two parallel lines. This is actually a one-liner, right? It feels right, right? The person who strays from the path, then where does he find himself? In the company of Rephaim ghosts. Now, we actually had this before. I guess we didn't dwell on it. I don't remember dwelling on it. We had, I think, in chapter 6 or so, Rephaim come up. Rephaim is two things in biblical literature. One is a people.
They heal. Right?
I'm sorry?
Is that the same shorish, Rapha, when you heal?
Yeah, so it is the same shorish, and some people you find the etymology of I'll just say one. There's a people called the Rephaim. Fox says this has nothing to do with that. I'm not so sure. I remember in my day we connected the fact that people called Rephaim because they were a mythological people. They were just a ghost of a people, the remnant of an idea, a memory of a people. But regardless, the word Rephaim comes up in biblical literature as what we would call a ghost, as the presence of the leftover presence of a soul who's no longer living. Now, how do you get there? There is at least one commentator that understands it from the World Heal. They have the opportunity of being healed from their sins after death. That's kind of a stretch. That's one etymology. Others, and I think probably majority, see it as something. Rafa is something very light, like flimsy. They're flimsy in the same way we think of all the pictures of ghosts that we've seen, that you can see through them, right? At least in more modern TV and movies. And so ghosts are there, but they're not in other cultures. It feels like they're in the Ugaritic culture, in one of the other ancient Near Eastern cultures. I don't remember what he cited. They could be some demonic presence, but it doesn't feel like it in biblical literature. In other words, they don't have a will. They're not a force of evil unto themselves, but they are amongst the dead. They're a remnant of the dead. So if you stray from the path, eventually you'll end up dead. You'll an early death. And the greatest threat in biblical literature is not to die, right? Nobody lives forever. It's an early death. Yeah. Okay. Any comments about this?
Well, would that mean that people and that children who die were straying from the path of prudence? I mean, in biblical times, childhood death was commonplace.
Yeah. So again, there's no set Torah, theological Torah of the Hebrew Bible. There are different themes that come up. And one of those themes that comes up, as I think you know, is that the children suffer for the sins of their parents. Now that's discounted afterwards and later already by prophets like Ezekiel and Jeremiah, who say, no, everybody, they get judged upon their own thing. And by the way, the idea that somebody dies young and they didn't do anything wrong, that kind of gave birth in rabbinic literature or post-biblical literature to Olam Haba. There's two worlds. There's this world and the world to come. So the way to theologically answer why bad things happen to good people and then they die, if you're in this world and you're still trying to teach people to adhere to the Torah, they say, yeah, okay, but they didn't get this world is nothing, but their reward will come in the world to come. So that's kind of those are things you can't, those are conversation stoppers, as Professor Seymour Fox used to say. There's not much nowhere to go really after that part of the conversation with the person who holds to those beliefs. To my mind, there's a danger in those. There's a comfort in those beliefs, absolute comfort. And as a rabbi, I have spoken in that way. There was one particular case, an older man, I may have told you before, whose grandson was in the army, and he turns out after he died that people didn't know that he suffered from deep depression. He left notebooks and notebooks that nobody knew he had. And when it became clear that he committed suicide and wasn't kidnapped, his grandfather came to my office late at night. He could see the light was on. He came to the office in the synagogue and wanted to know if Daniel was going to hell because he committed suicide, because that's what the Chabad rabbi had taught him, not about his grandson, but had taught in South Africa. And I said with full conviction, no, absolutely not. He's going to Gan Eden. Now, and I felt a little ashamed of myself afterwards, because I said, but I don't believe in that myself. That was one of the times early in this is my first year in the field. So it's 93. It's when I realized that you often have to live in two places, theologically, psychologically, to be something different for different people. And there's a fine line between doing that and being a fake. Some people might say, well, that's hypocritical, that's a fake. No, I think there's and I learned that also in those years working with people dying of AIDS, that depending on the family that it was coming into, and how I would people from Mizrahi traditions, they would ask me to bless their child with AIDS, like with hands, and it's nothing I would have ever seen myself doing. But then I began to do that, and because I don't think that I have a power, there's no godly power flowing through me. On the other hand, you see the comfort that it gives certain people, and with time, I've done that. I continue to do that in certain situations, and it's living in two places. I'll call it that way. It's living in two different theologies, perhaps. Anyway, back to this. So ghosts in this case is not necessarily an evil place to be, but it's probably symbolized an early death. Okay. All right. So let's do the first section from Midrash Mishlei. And this is not from chapter 21. This is from chapter 28 in Midrash Mishlei, but it makes use of our verse here, which is why I brought it.
Reb Huna said, anyone to whom words of Torah are not dear, his prayer is an abomination. Reb Hanin said, here it is said, he who turns a deaf ear to instruction, while elsewhere it is said, who stops his ears, followed by, not followed not by to instruction, but by at the cry of the wretched. Just as there, the conclusion is, he will call and not be answered. So likewise there, the conclusion is, a prayer is an abomination.
Okay, his challenge are the words in chapter 28 of Proverbs, which we'll get to one day, that the words, his prayer is an abomination. It's almost as if one of the students says to Rav Huna, how could they possibly say that? He says, well, this is what it means. You've got to compare two verses. That verse with a prayer is an abomination, which comes after, it comes after he who turns a deaf ear to instruction. Right. It's so the verse there is, he who turns a deaf ear to instruction, his prayer is an abomination. Comparing atimatos naim, that word otem is to stuff one's ears, to plug one's ears, and he says you've got to see that in the context of the verse that we have in our chapter here. The one who stops up his ears, it's not followed by instruction here. Here it's the cry of the wretched, and in the same way that in our verse here, his call will not be answered. Here, in the same way it says, the guy in Rav Huna, in the same way it says in that verse over there, the one that we're studying right today, that that person's call will not be answered because he did not hear other people's call. He says in our verse, Rav Huna, in our verse in chapter 28, the person who doesn't listen to the words of Torah, to instruction, then that person's prayers will not be heard. So that's it. It's Rav Chanin and Rav Huna are bringing together, in the tradition, bringing together two cases of atimatos naim. I didn't know the word, but we went in my, I learned a lot of Hebrew in my first months in the army, of words that I never heard before. Now, kids that grew up in Israel and the guys that were in high school and they had older brothers that were in the army and their parents in the army, they knew all this terminology, but it never came up. Earplugs. The word earplugs never came up. Atameos naim, because we didn't go to. I was in yeshiva. We never went to the pool. We didn't. We weren't flying in business class. Where did you have earplugs from? Now, I mean, it's normal to us, but I was a kid, and I could not for the life figure out what they were saying when we were going to the rifle range to do our first time, that you have to put in your atameos naim. I just didn't know what it was until I kind of looked at both sides, because you're scared. You're like, any wrong move, you get in trouble. You have to run around the block, run to that tree and back. Basic training. Anyway, so atameos naim, the same verb that we have here, otem oznaim. By the way, I sat through an entire lecture about the manganon shel M16, manganon hayiriyah shel M16. It was about how the M16 works, because when you're in tank school and base training, you have these technical things. And I'm listening to this guy, and I for the life of me, I didn't know the word manganon. So manganon is the machinery, the device, But I just didn't know. I had no idea what he was talking about. Anyway, okay, all right. That's neither here nor there. I try to have my ears open. Okay, Malka, how about Midrash Mishlei 21:14?
Midrash Mishlei, Rabbi Yohanan said, when anyone dispenses righteous charity in secret, God diverts the angel of death, who is called anger, from him and from the members of his household, as it is said, a gift in secret subdues anger, a present in private fierce rage.
Okay, so now we learned something new. I think has anybody met this angel before? This angel of death, whose name is anger, right?
Saint, is there a Saint Anger anywhere?
Yeah, Af-el. Usually there's an L at the end of the angel, right? Af-el. But Af here is anger. So, yeah, if angels are just an extension of God and God has anger, it's actually in certain level of understanding God through angelology. It's, in other words, angels don't have a will of themselves; they're only doing God's will. Then it's not, anger is not exactly part of God. It's an extension of God, perhaps not done by God.
That seems, I don't know if that seems like, so if the angel of death visits all of us one day, is that God's anger at us?
Well, yeah, no, I think it's just one aspect. Yeah, yeah. It's like a lot of things are called different names. Uh,
Mhm.
yeah, I don't know what the focus is. I don't think that would be the focus. That doesn't sound reasonable.
Right.
No. But I think the focus is to say there is divine anger, and maybe taking away from maybe the maybe the desire of Rabbi Yochanan, it's probably Yochanan, by the way, it's probably a typo. Rabbi Yochanan is not to necessarily create another angel, but to deflect from God. In other words, don't think of God as anger. What's the complaint that one often hears in interfaith gatherings about, or maybe outside people that haven't really looked at the Old Testament God is a God of anger. You know,
Mhm.
hear that,
God
which
of wrath. Mhm.
you know, which is a God, which is kind of silly, only because yes, there is that aspect of it, and there's Jesus of anger as well. There's there's certainly anger in Revelation. There's a lot of anger in the New Testament, but it's that yeah. Okay.
It just, I don't see why they're calling the angel. I still don't see it calling the angel of death anger.
Did Rabbi Yochanan just make that up, or is it from another source?
Right.
Well, he doesn't bring a proof text. Yeah.
So it's his little personification.
Yeah, I mean, all of them are their little person, right? So, but
Mhm.
sometimes they bring a proof text, sometimes not, unless, of course, you want to accept the very fundamentalist view that all of rabbinic literature was given to Moses on Mount Sinai. Even this little thing here. Um, let's see what we might learn here from Buber's.
Right. And I thought it was that they had to, so to speak, they said righteous charity, so they had to put that adjective there with charity instead of just saying charity.
Yeah, yeah, it should be Rabbi Yochanan, by the way. It's in my
Oh,
typo.
Yochanan. Uh-huh.
כל מי שנותן צדקה בסתר, הקדוש ברוך הוא יכפה מלאך המוות, שנקרא אף,
Hmm.
ממנו ומאנשי ביתו.
Hmm.
Yeah, so what I guess that the need here is pushing away, yichapeh in this context, we pushing away the anger. I know why, because we had that question to begin with, right? Whose anger is it talking about?
Hmm.
So the anger is talking about is God's anger in the background, and I guess Rabbi Yochanan is saying, well, it doesn't say God here. It must be an angel of God, and now we have a new a new name for the angel of God we didn't know, which is Af. Af El, right? The angel of God is anger. Yeah, personification of anger. That helps us understand whose anger it is. If you personify anger, doesn't matter who it is. You don't need who it belongs to. Okay. Yeah, this stuff is not so simple, this Midrash Mishlei. Um, okay, go ahead to the next paragraph, please.
Rabbi Levy said, the reward of him who gives it is greater than the reward of him who receives it. For he who gives it does so as an act of righteousness, while he who receives it does not know whether it is proper for him to do so or not. For it is taught in the Mishnah, he who has 50 zuz and trades with them may not accept charity. And anyone who does not need to accept it, yet accepts it nevertheless, such a one will not die of old age until he has driven, by necessity, to accept it from his fellow creatures. This is the general principle. Whoever does not need to act, it yet accepts it nevertheless, will not depart
It, whoever did,
depart from
whoever does not need to accept it yet accepts it. Two
it.
typos there.
Right. Will not depart from the word. Is that from the word that is from the world until
Yeah.
he is driven by necessity to accept it from his fellow creatures. Conversely, anyone who is entitled to accept charity yet refrains from doing so will not depart from this world until he prospers enough to dispense charity out of his wealth to others. As it is said, blessed is the one who trusts in the Lord.
Okay, so this isn't a terribly. I mean, what's touched off, at least the editor who brings this Midrash, not the editor of Proverbs, but the editor of Midrash Mishlei brings this because the verse is talking about charity, matan beseter. That's what he hears, that giving secretly. And then he says, well, there's another aspect of giving as well. There's the giving, but there's also the receiving. And there's a question about who gets to receive. In other words, whoever gives, that's fine. And this is an interesting point. I read, a few years ago, I think in interview with somebody in the world of Jewish philanthropy who lives in Manhattan, lives in New York City, and she says, I always have a pile of dollar bills in my purse. So whenever I pass somebody on the street who's asking for money in New York City, I give them $1. I said, that is not all the dollars I give in an entire month don't detract from my level of living, right? So what does she give? $50 a month. How many are you going to give? 70? She says, I don't live any worse because of that money. And yet, do I know that everybody needs it? Because that's what people say. They don't really need it, right? Like in Stockholm, there are these Roma families that bind together in their different places, and they have these areas. Like in a lot of cities around the world, they have an area which is theirs where they set up their kids and especially if there's anybody, children with defects of some sort, and then they come together and they pool their money, and people say, well, they're fine. They don't need that kind of money. That's not going to help them. In other words, it's an industry. It's not just like somebody who really fell in hard times and needs $10. We all have the same dilemma whenever on the street. But when this woman wrote it, she says, I don't want to be in the position of judging somebody. I'm not going to put myself in the position of, does this person deserve it or not deserve it? So she automatically gives that $1 or $2, whatever it was. It was years ago I read this. And that made an impression on me because so often we go there. We say, does this person, what are they going to use it for drugs? Are they going to, what it's not a good thing for us to be in that position of judging. And I think what Rabbi Levi is saying here is that whenever you give, you're good. If you give, you're good, right? Of course, there's cases if you give and you continue to give to somebody who's killing themselves, whatever it is, there's a problem with that. But just in general, the begging thing. The other problem, though, is the receiver. And then it quotes the Mishnah here, that there's certain conditions. If you've got 50 zoos with which to trade, then you shouldn't be taking from the community chest or from the handout. And I have to say this, when I'm sometimes at food distribution centers, this happened last month when I was in India at one of the churches. Somebody drives up with a car which is way more expensive than my car. Then it feels a little funny to be bringing them for two families this stuff. On the other hand, the stuff is there. It's got to be given out. It's going to go bad. There's meat, there's vegetables, whatever. It's this this dilemma that we find, I think, every time in any kind of giving thing. And what if they happen to have they got a Cadillac from their uncle who died penniless. That's the last he spent his money on. And they, who am I to judge if they're driving a Cadillac? So I think yeah. All right, that's what I have to say.
The saying is that if a person who doesn't need it accepts it, eventually they're going to need it. And a person who doesn't need it and also doesn't accept it will eventually be to the point where they have enough money they can give to others.
Right. So this is kind of counterbalancing that verse that we read before, and that even though somebody's doing everything right, their life looks in shambles. Even though they do, that's just the way it is. No, don't worry. This is a poetic justice kind of a very common in rabbinic literature. The person will get their reward in the future, whether it's in the world to come, or in this case, in this world. They'll end up being Rita Claire, do you want to say something? No, okay. Anybody else? So I guess what I want to say about Midrash Mishlei in this case is that it what you can say about almost every Midrash is that there will be a commentary on what we read in the text, in the biblical text, and then there'll be something which is not exactly related to it, but adjacent to it. It's almost as if, we're talking about charity. I've got something to say about charity, is if we were in the Beit Midrash. Rav Levi, here's Rabbi Yochanan So he says, oh, I've got something to say about that as well.
I have a question about the person who's entitled to accept charity, meaning that you need it, right?
Yeah.
Yet refrains from doing so, will not depart from this world until he prospers enough to dispense charity out of his wealth to others. I think it's foolish. If you need it and somebody's giving it to you, take it.
Yeah, so I think this is descriptive and not prescriptive, right? We always have that in whatever we're doing. This is saying you may be watching from the side and you say, I know that guy needs to take it.
Right.
I know he needs it. And so the text is saying, maybe God, the text is saying, take a deep breath. He's not taking now, don't worry. Will come a time when he will win the lottery and he'll be the one who's giving out the money. Or when his idea will, he'll have his IPO and he will. Okay. Anything else? Yo, we're not going to face. So let's go ahead and see what we can get done in this section. Richard, how about 1722 for us?
A man who loves pleasure comes to want. He who loves wine and oil does not grow rich. The wicked are the ransom of the righteous. The traitor comes in place of the upright. It is better to live in the desert than with a contentious, vexatious wife. Precious treasure and oil are in the house of a wise man, and a fool of a man will run through them. One who strives to do good and kind deeds attains life, success, and honor. One wise man prevailed over a city of warriors and brought down its mighty stronghold.
Okay. So disparate couplets, different things are going on here. This idea of, I guess, hedonism, right? Eventually, you won't be satiated, right? No matter how much the more you get into it. So if you fly business class, that you want to fly first class, you want to fly private, then you don't want to fly at all, right? Whatever it is, moving on to the next, whatever it is, the next thing. And somebody who lives in luxury is going to pay for it. Right? It's kind of common sense, I think. The wicked are the ransom to the righteous is challenging, Well, what does that mean? Kofar. What it probably means is from the world of onish kfutati, collective punishment. Yeah, from collective punishment. Kofar is connected to the poll tax. It's kind of like when a community is being taxed by a power to be, maybe because it's done something wrong or whatever, and the person who's righteous, not participated in that, still has to still does the punish, still involved in being punished.
Can it be that the righteous ransom the wicked?
But what do you mean? What does that mean? You mean that they go and somebody who's been taken captive, they ransom them? Is that what you're thinking?
No, not physically, but I'm just saying in terms of maybe the ransom is that the wicked turn around their ways. They kind of ransom them from being wicked.
Uh-huh. How do you ransom somebody from being wicked? Possibly. I think that
Because of your example of being righteous.
yeah. And the second line, maybe that allows us to, in other words, the bad are causing the evil people are causing a bad situation for the good people. That's what's common to both. The wicked end up being ransom. The righteous end up being the ransom because of the wicked, and the upright are displaced by the traitors. I don't know. Then we get to the verse which is similar to the verse that we had before, right? And not only
Can I just comment? I Googled it. It says wicked people will ultimately suffer the consequences of their action, often in a way that benefits or spares the righteous.
Yeah, so what's that, Wikipedia on this verse?
Oh, I don't know. It's AI overview.
Yeah, 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 I don't know. Yeah. Okay, then we have this revisiting it's almost as if somebody says, wait a minute. Oh, Rabbi, remember what you said about 15 minutes ago about the man with a difficult wife, contentious wife? It's better if he dwells in the corner of his roof. You know what? It's better if he dwells in the desert. It's almost somebody said, oh, I got something to say about that. That happens sometimes in class, in all classes. Somebody wasn't, it takes a while for it to trickle down and they say, I got something.
Speaking of living in the desert.
Yeah. Yes, I like to say to people when, people who've known me over the years, whether in Jerusalem or Tel Aviv and Stockholm and then, but Palm Spring, I said, yes, I'm self-exiled into the desert. I'm self-exiled. Okay. I think the rest is pretty much the precious treasure, the oil part there might be a typo. In other words, a textual problem that it shouldn't be there. It could be a different word, ishgon, as opposed to shemen. But that's not so important. Anyway, yeah. So this would be lots of economic advice. Why don't we see this? Who is Richard? Why don't we try Midrash, the first part of Midrash Mishlei here?
He who strives to do right and kind deeds attains life, success, and honor. Rabbi Elazar, son of Rabbi Shimon, said, anyone who pursues righteousness will have children who are masters of Torah, masters of righteous charity, masters of rabbinic lore. Where is the scriptural proof that they will be masters of Torah? It is written here, life, and it is written elsewhere, you shall have life. Where is the scriptural proof that they will be masters of righteous charity? In the verse, attains life, success, and honor. Where is the scriptural proof that they will be masters of rabbinic lore? It is written here, honor, and it is written elsewhere, the wise shall obtain honor.
All right. So drawing out this rather simple verse and to explain something about the good life, who's the person, the Adam HaMushlam, the whole person. You want to get to that? Then you will get to that if you raise your children learning Torah. Go ahead.
One wise man prevailed over a city of warriors and brought down its mighty stronghold, a city. This refers to the heavens, which are the city of the ministering angels. One wise man, this refers to the Torah. Where in scripture are ministering angels called mighty in the verse? Bless the Lord, O his angels, mighty creatures who do his bidding. Where is the scriptural proof that Moses ascended on high? In the verse, and Moses went up to God. Where in scripture is the Torah called stronghold? In the verse, may the Lord grant a stronghold to his people.
Okay, so this is kind whoever asked the question before, and how can somebody just decide what does he have proof? Is this Rabbi Yochanan's view? Did he get it from something? I guess Leslie said something. Here's the interesting part for me is the didactical way this is set up here. It's you want to break it down. Very often rabbinic literature, it'll say something, this is like the verse this, and you have to make the connections yourself. Here it goes through piece by piece. Where is it written? And it tells you exactly how to either see it in our verse here or compare our verse, a word with a verse in another place. Very typical to Midrash. And then also typical to Midrash is to have the words another interpretation. Go on here, and I've got something to say about this. Go ahead.
Another interpretation, and Moses went up to God. Rabbi Samuel Bar Nachmani said, before the Torah was given, we are told that the heavens belong to the Lord.
You see the three dots there? This goes on for a page, an entire page of Midrash that has to do with, and Moses went up to God. It has nothing to do with Proverbs. It only has to, there's a typical thing, as I've mentioned before, when somebody's copying a manuscript of a Midrash, so they've got whatever topic it is and whatever verse it is, but that person at some point might say, wait a minute, oh, you bring that verse? I know I know plenty of other stuff in that verse. But essentially what I do every lecture, every study session we have, I go on about other stuff, which have little to do with the text itself, which we were studying. And so this goes on, and I didn't bring the entire text because it doesn't help us with Proverbs, but very typical to Midrashic and to Talmudic literature as well. Sometimes Talmudic literature is organized, is edited in such a way that a passage will quote, say, Rabbi Yochanan, and then it says, and another thing Rabbi Yochanan said, and another thing Rabbi Yochanan said, and it'll go down 10 things that have nothing to do with the topic of the tractate of the Talmud you're talking about. It's just the way our literature is. I think it's cool. I like it. Other people have a real hard time with it because they want to be very, very square. Well, no, what we're doing this. And so somebody like Rambam Maimonides, he translated the Babylonian Talmud not only from a mixture of Hebrew and Aramaic, Babylonian Aramaic, to Hebrew, which is close to Mishnaic Hebrew, which is an easy Hebrew to a simpler form of Hebrew, but also translated all those different conversations into, let's stay on topic. Now we're talking about the laws of the prayer, the evening prayer. Now we're talking about the laws of king and how the Sanhedrin works with the king. So then, and his genius was taking from all those places without AI helping him, right? And putting it in an understandable order. I think that maybe let's just, if I can keep people just 2 more minutes, well, let's just finish the Midrash Mishlei on this, that quotes this this verse. One more section, Richard.
Okay. Great is righteousness, for because of it, God has been praised for his promise to bring salvation to Israel in the coming future, as it is said, it is I who contend it is I who contend in righteousness, power to save. Great is righteousness, for it bequeaths honor and life to those who practice it. And as it is said, he who strives for righteousness and kind deeds attains life, success, and honor. Rabbi Levi said, anyone who pursues righteousness and mercy in this world will find life, success, and honor on the day of his death.
Okay. All right. So we'll start next week and finish this. And I don't know, maybe I have to see if Midrash Mishlei, the way that we're doing it is beneficial. I think perhaps we're getting a little bit too bogged down in a text, which is sometimes interesting, sometimes less so. But let's see. We'll start with verse 23 next week of the text and try. And we're almost done with this section. In any case, we'll get back to different, more of a thematic approach. So Les, you're off this week, right? You're leaving?
Yeah, I'll be gone until the last week of August.
Okay, and as I mentioned before, Sasha and I are leaving on the 19th of August, I think, for almost a month. So we'll be taking off then, but we will be meeting next week. And that's it. Thank you for being here, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Madalena, for setting this up.